France, 1800, a new century. This was going to be the people's century, a century of liberty, equality, fraternity. 10 years earlier, the violence and bloodletting of the French Revolution had ushered in these brave ideals. The ideals and the Republic were soon to crumble. The ghettos of the unemployed, the factories run on child labor, the poor living in the new ugly landscape of the Industrial Revolution made France a hotbed of unrest. The new society wasn't delivering a better world fast enough. By 1815, the old way seemed to many the best way. The Congress of Vienna restored the former political order. The ruling class were back in charge. A young couple, married as the new century began, lived amid these upheavals. Jean-Antoine, a doctor, and his wife Marie made a formidable team. Together, they gave what time they could to the poor, providing medical care while raising their own family and trying to establish a medical practice. They would have 14 children. 11 would die. One of the survivors was Frederic. Frederic Ozanam. If there's one word that sums up Frederic Ozanam, it's hope. Frederic believed there was a better way, a more just way, a more compassionate way. He never lost that hope, and he believed he could make a difference. Frederic was a Christian, a Catholic, living in a rural kingdom fast becoming an industrial power. It was a whole new world. And no one really knew what an industrial power was, what it should look like, be like, how it should operate. Whatever shape this new world was to take, Frederic believed, even as a youth, that his faith, his Christianity, could help the new world become a just world. At 19, Frederic left home in Lyon for Paris. He was a country boy in a big city. And the big city was still recovering from the 1830 revolution 2 years earlier. Louis-Philippe, the new king, was already under great pressure. Disease, overcrowding, and poor wages remained unchecked. There was another push for a republic. Anti-clerical feeling was strong in Paris, especially at the university where the new sciences were dominating thinking. It was here at the Sorbonne that Frederic was to study law as his father had wished. Many at the university viewed Christianity as the enemy of social progress, where priests and bishops were no more than partners of the hated ruling class. For Frederic, it was a big adjustment. Off campus, he was living in a boarding house. While some students reveled in their new freedom, Frederic felt isolated. The scientist André Ampère agreed to take Frederic into his family home as a boarder. Ampère, a brilliant academic, was breaking new ground in the study of electricity. He saw the same brilliance in Frederic. For Ampère, there was no conflict between Christianity and progress. His gentle influence helped Frederic immensely. They were to stay friends for life. But Frederic, at 19 years of age, wanted more than gentle influence. With several friends, he began a debating group at the house of a local newspaper proprietor, Joseph Bailly. The group, or conference, met each week. The idea was to argue that social reform and Christianity could travel hand in hand. It was a brave move, considering the times. They wanted to highlight history's debt to Christianity. By sheer force of argument, they would convert the masses. What seemed like a good idea at the time failed dismally. It attracted little attention and, in the end, alienated more students than it won. Nevertheless, this small group became close friends, none of them realizing the chain of events about to unfold and the impact those events would have. Across the other side of the city, in one of the slums of Paris, was a woman who would greatly influence Frederic. Sister Rosalie Rondeau was a daughter of charity. The daughters were an order of sisters founded by the famous French saint Vincent de Paul 200 years earlier. Rosalie was the Mother Teresa of 19th century Paris. For 50 years she worked with and for the poorest of the poor. Against her wishes, she was later decorated with the highest award in France, the Cross of the Legion of Honor. Joseph Bailly knew Rosalie. Bailly wrote to her in early 1833, "I am sending you two young men. Their charity is spirited, but they are young and impetuous. They need direction." The two young men were Frederic and his friend Auguste Le Taillandier. Auguste had grown tired of what he called the sterile words of the debating group. He wanted to help the poor directly. So did Frederic. And at the grand age of 20, he and Auguste and 5 others formed the first Conference of Charity, later known in France and around the world as the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. Rosalie gave Frederic and Auguste the names of 3 families. She suggested their group adopt each family and offer what assistance they could. Her advice was simple: be kind and love, for love is the first gift to the poor. They will appreciate your kindness and your love more than all else you can bring them. Up till then, Frederic and Auguste's only experience with the poor was to leave firewood with the first cold man they could find. Frederic later recalled how nervous they were climbing the stairs to the man's garret. They dropped the wood and left as fast as they could. It seemed now to Frederic that Sister Rosalie had much to teach them. The members of this first conference were 23 years of age or younger. Bailly was the exception. At 40, he was the father figure. With his business skills and maturity, he was promptly voted president. The group knew they had a lot of growing to do, emotionally and spiritually. Each week they would meet, pray, discuss their work, and, arguments aside, encourage one another. Support would often come from the poor themselves. As Sister Rosalie had told them, when you meet the poor, you meet Christ. As the poor became part of their lives, so too did prayer. For Frederic, the gospel that challenged him to treat others as he would like to be treated was now taking on a whole new meaning. From that period onwards, Frederic would read something from the Gospels each day. He called it his daily bread. The challenge then, he said, was to put it into action. The growth in the number of conferences was staggering. By the time the last of these original members died in the final decade of the century, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul numbered more than 7,000 conferences in over 30 countries. In whatever measure they could, this small group had given their century liberty, equality, fraternity. Frederic had a lot on his mind. On the one hand, he wanted the conferences of charity to help those in need directly. On the other, he wanted the work of the society to alert the wider public, especially the middle classes, to the needs of the poor. Maybe then, he thought, the people of France could begin to eliminate the causes of poverty. He was strongly supported by the Archbishop of Paris, Denis Affre. In turn, many young priests became enthusiastic about Frederic's ideas, and his ideas were plentiful. In 1838, Frederic, now 25, and the youngest lecturer at the University of Lyon, denounced the new economic liberalism. He condemned an economy where the working poor created wealth the poor themselves would never enjoy. He said charity was not enough to solve these problems. There must be justice between employers and workers. He called for a regulated labor market with state controls and organized workers. For France and for the times, these were radical ideas. While revolution was brewing yet again, Frederic was going through his own personal revolution. He had fallen in love. It was 1841. He was 28, and Amélie Toulacroix was very much on his mind. They married that year. Far from mellowing his passion for reform, married life seemed to encourage it. With Amélie's support, he accepted a lower salary with a position as lecturer at the Sorbonne. Here in Paris, he could be at the center of Catholic social action. By the following year, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul had 2,000 members in Paris alone. As Frederic noted, the conferences were now assisting 1 in 4 poor families in that city. While membership grew, so too did the pressures within France and the whole of Europe. During this time, Frederic was one of the most prominent Catholic voices calling for social reform. In 1848, revolution swept through France. A new democratic republic was proclaimed. Frederic could not remain silent. Seizing the moment, he and Abbé Maret, a professor of theology, published The New Era, a newspaper supporting the fragile republic. In the turmoil, it became widely read. People either praised it or condemned it. It called for legislation to protect children, a pension for workers who were sick or old, reduced working hours, a graduated income tax instead of indirect taxes, partnership and profit sharing, and compulsory arbitration in industrial disputes. For the ruling class, which was soon to suppress the revolution violently, such reforms were simply unimaginable. Those like Frederic who chose to speak out were placing themselves and those close to them in danger. Just how dangerous the situation was would soon become tragically clear. In June, at the height of the fighting and at Frederic's urging, Archbishop Affre, patron of the new era, went to the barricades. While negotiating peace between the insurgents and the army, Affre, one of the few men both sides respected, was hit by a stray bullet. 3 days later, the wounded Archbishop, Frederic's strongest and most vocal supporter, was dead. It was news throughout Europe. Frederic was devastated. The army went on to crush the workers. A conservative wave swept through France. Liberty, equality, fraternity was now a forbidden catch cry. The church found itself caught in the conservative tide, and with the death of the Archbishop, it became virtually silent on social issues. Frederic's dream of a church that strongly promoted social reform was pushed into the wings. Frederic himself would not live long enough to see it return to center stage. Ironically, this same year saw the publishing of the then little-known Communist Manifesto. It will be 43 years before the church responded with its own social manifesto on the condition of the working class by Pope Leo XIII. Despite the tragedy, Frederic remained outspoken, urging concerned Catholics to work through the Society of St. Vincent de Paul to stand by the poor in every possible way and to be with them in their suffering. The strain of recent events and repeated bouts of pleurisy were beginning to take their toll. Frederic's health was declining rapidly. Despite Amélie's care and encouragement, Frederic, now only 35, was bedridden for months at a time. He had 5 years to live. Seeking a remedy, he and Amélie decided to travel to warmer climates with their only child, Marie. For Frederic, there was no time like the present, and travel presented new opportunities. He began nurturing conferences throughout France, Italy, and beyond. By his 39th birthday, just 19 years since the first conference met, the Society had grown to more than 40,000 members across Europe and the Americas. At every opportunity, he combined his skills, scholar, journalist, and political activist, to advance the rights of the working class and the poor. He remained one of the strongest voices for social reform in the French church. Those governing France were by now inward-looking and tired of reform. Frederic spoke passionately for change. They weren't listening. In 1853, halfway through the century he so much wanted to change, Frederic died. Many of his friends, his wife Amélie and his young daughter Marie, were by his side. He was 40. In his final days, Frederic asked, "Why should I fear the God I love so much?" Fear never ruled Frederic Ozanam's life. When he felt he should act, he acted. When he felt he should speak out for the poor or for his faith or for a more just society, he refused to remain silent. He inspired his friends to see the challenge before them and to act. It was their time, their century, their chance to share liberty, equality, fraternity. Today, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul has spread to some 130 countries. Through its 900,000 members, the work and inspiration of Frederic and his friends